Hello everyone and welcome to this evening's event, 70 Years in NATO, Turkey's partnership with the Western Alliance since 1952. This event is co-hosted by the LSE Contemporary Turkish Studies and the European Institute. I'm Professor Yaprak Gürsoy and I'm the Chair of Contemporary Turkish Studies at the LSE European Institute. I'm delighted to be chairing this event today. When we first decided in early April to organize an event reflecting on Turkey's 70-year membership in NATO, perhaps none of us could have guessed how the subject would cover headlines in a matter of a few weeks. This was, of course, due to Ankara's announcement that Turkey might oppose NATO enlargement to Finland and Sweden following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And within a couple of weeks and days, the debate escalated to some even questioning Turkish membership in NATO altogether. Despite these recent developments, we still decided that we should cover Turkish membership in the Western Alliance since 1952, because any proper understanding of contemporary issues necessarily requires an understanding of how we got here, the historical context, and the background. Thankfully, I'm joined here by three experts who are more than qualified to inform us of Turkey's partnership with the Western Alliance. Before I introduce the speakers, however, I have a few housekeeping announcements, so please bear with me. For those Twitter users in the audience, the hashtag for today's event is LSE Turkey. This event is being recorded and will hopefully be made into a podcast, of course, if we have no technical difficulties. Our event will consist of presentations from our speakers, followed by a Q&A with the audience. When we come to the Q&A portion of our event, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So you can type your questions there, and I will receive your questions, and I will pose as many questions as possible to our speakers. Please do not forget to let us know of your name and affiliation when you also write your question. Now, to introduce our speakers in order of speaking, first we will have Gencer Özcan, who is a professor of international relations at Istanbul Bilgi University. His research concentrates on Turkish foreign and security policy, foreign policy analysis, and the Middle East. He will kick off our seminar by providing us with a brief overview of the first 50 years of Turkish membership in NATO. Oya Dursun-Özkanca will be our second speaker. She is the endowed chair of international studies and professor of political science at Elizabethtown College, USA. She is the author of Turkey-West Relations, the Politics of Intra-Alliance Opposition. Today, based on her book, she will reflect on the past 20 years from a Turkish perspective. Outzen will be our third speaker. Rich is a geopolitical consultant and a retired colonel and foreign area officer who served in the US State Department's policy planning staff. He served also as an advisor to several secretaries of state in the US. Rich will discuss the last 20 years of Turkish membership in NATO, but from the perspective of the US and NATO. Now I'm delighted to hand over to Gencer to begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Yaprak. I am very glad to be here, to be part of this event. And I would like to thank to all who contributed to the organization of this meeting. And in Turkey, like the British in the Britain, United Kingdom, we celebrate the platinum jubilee of Turkey's membership to NATO. And in that regard, I'm going to make 7 points to highlight the evolution of Turkey's relations with NATO. And I hope that these points will provide some insights to understand the present state of relations between NATO and Turkey. So my observations will roughly follow the evolutionary trajectory of the relationship and will focus on the impact of NATO's membership on Turkey's politics. So in doing so, I will critically engage Turkey's membership in NATO to point out that despite its weight over Turkish armed forces, the organization became instrumental in the making of the national security state, in which the military became pivotal agency. The first point, my first observation is that neither politicians nor laymen on the street differentiate NATO from the United States. This is a plain observation and very general observation, and it is still prevailing in Turkish politics. The two have always been identified as one. Identification of NATO with the United States caused manifold questions, but any problem that Turkey is having with the United States is perceived as a problem with NATO or a problem that NATO should sort out. This is the first thing I would like to mention. And the second point I would like to make, that Turkey's membership to NATO was an outcome of changing threat perceptions of the United States rather than the willingness of the ruling parties in Turkey. As soon as it became into being in 1949, NATO became an object of desire for all major parties in Turkey. The period before Turkey joined NATO in 1952 coincided with the transition to multi-politics in the country. So both parties aimed to get Turkey into NATO. However, the membership became possible only after global power configuration went through a substantial transformation. First, the Chinese Revolution, the end of US nuclear monopoly, and the Korean War. These important developments led or opened the way for the Turkey's membership. Not only Turkey's membership, of course, the Greece also became member together with Turkey. The third point I would like to make is that the NATO has always been perceived as an agency for the modernization of the army and of the society. NATO eagerly assumed and played an important role in the transformation of Turkey's infrastructure and the improvement of the military manpower in line with the requirements of the market economy in Turkey. Admission to NATO meant a lot for the young officers who were frustrated by the oppressive practices of the older generations of generals known to be Prussians. They welcomed the younger officers, welcomed the membership, and saw the membership as a window of opportunity for their fast-track promotion. So this created an interesting implications or fallouts for the coming decades, for the decades to come. And this brings me to my fourth point. Although indirectly, NATO played a significant role in Turkish politics. First and foremost, NATO remained aloof when the Turkish armed forces formed a fully fledged national security state in Turkey. The Turkish armed forces ousted the most pro-NATO government in May 1960. Being defined as an organization of like-minded, free and democratic states, NATO never problematized the militarization of the state in Turkey. In that regard, NATO has never been interested in the democratic backslide Turkey often went through. Neither politicians in Washington nor generals in Brussels ever seemed to have worried about the way top brass of NATO's second largest army interfered in politics in Turkey. Instead, generals declared their loyalty to the alliance when they seized the power using the same password. We remain loyal to NATO and CENTO. The fifth observation that I'm going to make is that NATO/United States has become part and parcel of all political debates prevailing in 1960s and 1970s. In the latter part of the 1960s, NATO membership and Turkey's relations with the United States were questioned by all influential socio-political movements. NATO was perceived as the stumbling block on the way to Turkey's development and prosperity. Arguments such as Turkey cannot remain independent unless it leaves NATO was the leitmotif of the prevailing political discourse of the late 1960s. Such arguments made inroads into universities as well as military garrisons. At the turn of the 70s, a considerable number of young officers were in favor of Turkey's withdrawal from NATO. Interestingly enough, the source of inspiration for the young officers was the Ba'athist officers who came to power in several Middle Eastern countries. The coup plotted by young officers was foiled by pro-NATO junta that forced the incumbent government to resign in March 1971. The sixth observation that I'm going to make about the Turkey-NATO relations is that with the exception of the first decade of Turkey's membership, public perceptions of NATO have always been very negative and low. There are several factors at play here. Starting in 1964, anti-American, anti-NATO debates are exacerbated by Turkey's problems with Greece over Cyprus. These problems never reached a comprehensive agreement, but NATO has so far played a significant role in preventing the two members of the alliance involved in a military conflict. Seventh point that I would like to make, and this is going to be my last point, Turkey's position within NATO went through a substantial change after the Cold War. This happened because Turkey had already begun to adapt itself to the new threat environment of the post-Cold War period. During the Cold War, the major asset Turkey provided NATO was its geographical location. And Turkey's contribution, to use economic jargon, was labor-intensive, providing cheap labor to NATO. However, throughout the 1990s, Turkish armed forces learned bitter lessons from the asymmetrical warfare it involved within and without its borders. Plus, procured new platforms such as AWACS and tanker planes, improved its power projection capabilities, and transformed its colossal army into an expeditionary force. Since the turn of the century, Turkey's added value to NATO's out-of-area operations, went beyond labor-intensive contributions. So the questions as to where Turkey is located to a great extent lost its significance. But we are still far away from the alliance that might ask brave questions to its members if their democratic credentials are in compliance with universal principles. With this point, I would like to finish my talk. So 9 minutes. Yaprak.
Gencer, that was quite good. Thank you very much. And over to you, Oya.
Thank you very much, Yaprak. So I am really honored to be in front of this distinguished audience, and it really comes to a full circle for me because the idea of the first book that I authored on Turkey-West relations came when I was a visiting fellow at London School of Economics in 2013. So it's a privilege to be here. And as you mentioned, I was charged to talk about the last 20 years of the Turkey-NATO relations. And Turkey really, because of the fact that it is geostrategically located between Europe, Middle East, Balkans, Mediterranean, Black Sea, South Caucasus, it really serves a significant strategic importance for the transatlantic alliance. And as Professor Özcan has skillfully summarized, during the Cold War, Turkey has been well embedded in Western security infrastructures. However, this is despite a few periods of unease, of course, that was discussed earlier. And Turkey, over the last decade or so, has started to adopt a number of proactive and anti-Western foreign policies. Scarcely a day passes when, without a report or a headline on the front pages of the leading newspapers, questioning Turkey's reliability as a Western ally. So how did we get here was the question that I asked in my book, first book, Turkey-West Relations. And what I have done was I have conducted over 200 elite interviews with the policymakers, members of parliament, and journalists and scholars in a variety of different countries. And I started to notice certain patterns. So to give you some examples, Turkey-US relations over the course of these last couple of years have been very tense over the US support for the Syrian Kurds in the fight against the Islamic State terrorist organization, over the extradition issue of Fethullah Gülen, whom the Turkish authorities implicate behind the failed coup attempt back in July 2016. Turkey has been also disappointed on the EU front over the lack of progress over its accession negotiations and visa liberalization talks. And on top of it all, Turkey has experienced a rapprochement with Russia, particularly over energy, defense, and security issues, which further deepened the rift between Turkey and its NATO allies. So this is the framework that I used in my book. I came up with 3 different processes of intra-alliance opposition using the soft balancing literature as a starting point. And boundary testing is where the allies try to learn what the acceptable norms of behavior are and what are the red lines not to be crossed. In boundary challenging, the second process, the allies are having some disagreements, but still signaling their willingness to work from within the alliance. And in process number 3, boundary breaking, you have the allies increasingly signaling to the rest of the allies that they are willing to position themselves against the other allies from outside of the alliance. So these are the 3 processes, and at any time the processes can be reverted back. So it is not a deterministic type of a thing. And as you can see with the Venn diagram here, there are a lot of convergences between the different tools of statecraft that I have classified based on the intensity of the intra-alliance opposition behavior. So in the book, I used a few case studies that would take us from 2010 to 2019, and you can see the intensity of the tools of statecraft that was employed by Turkey vis-a-vis the transatlantic allies. You can see that the intensity has, there is a trend to be identified, and the intensity is increasing with more and more boundary breaking type of tools of statecraft that are being used against the Western allies, meaning the United States, European Union, and NATO. Time and again, 2 issues have haunted Turkey's relations with the NATO allies in the last couple of years, and those include 1, Syria, and secondly, the S-400 missile defense system issue. The first one is Turkish authorities with regards to Syria have repeatedly brought up their complaints about the other NATO allies not taking Turkey's security concerns seriously, especially with regards to supporting the terrorist groups that threaten Turkey's national security. And since 2014, for instance, the United States has relied on YPG, People's Protection Units, Kurdish militants, in the fight against the Islamic State, despite strong objections from the Turkish authorities over and over again. So we have seen the Turkish authorities making the arguments that YPG is an extension, an organic extension of the PKK terrorist organization, which is recognized as a terrorist organization, not only by Turkey, but also by the European Union and NATO countries as well. In May 2017, we have seen the US-Turkey relationship reaching its nadir when the top advisor to Turkish President Erdogan threatened that Turkish rockets may target US forces in northern Syria if their collaboration with the Kurdish fighters along the Turkish border continues. So here you see the threat to use force, which is going from the territory of soft balancing, which is balancing between allies and friends, into hard balancing area where you use military means in order to balance against your counterpart. So that was very interesting, and it triggered a variety of Syrian interventions by the Turkish military has triggered a number of different sanctions against Turkey by the NATO allies, notably CAATSA sanctions, countering America's adversaries through the Sanctions Act is the one that the Congress approved. And then Trump administration just shortly before leaving office started to implement, symbolically at least. The Czech Republic, Finland, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, they imposed full arms embargoes over Turkey. And France, Italy did some partial embargoes, and Germany suspended its plans to sell certain engines for manufacturing an indigenously built Turkish battle tank. So these are a few examples where the relationship really went off the tracks in terms of, soft balancing over to the territories of hard balancing briefly. And Turkey recently announced, as we all know, its intention to launch yet another military intervention over the border to Syria to create safe zones. And they declared, the Turkish authorities declared, about 30 kilometers long safe borders, focusing on Tal Rifat and Manbij areas. Second haunting issue for Turkey-NATO relations has been the S-400s issues. The purchase of that, the agreement to purchase that back in 2017 between Turkey and Russia raised a lot of questions as to whether Turkey is really making this shift in its defense posture towards Russia, and created another major rift. This wasn't without a precedent, just so everybody knows. Back in 2013, Turkey declared that they would purchase a missile defense system from a Chinese company, but because of the pressures from the NATO allies, Turkish authorities at the very last moment said, okay, we are putting a moratorium on our research for missile defense systems. And NATO allies this time around, when the deal was brokered between Turkey and Russia, brought to the forefront a number of issues, including integration, compatibility issues, and the possibility of Russian intelligence infiltration into the NATO systems. And they also said that this undermines the Connected Forces initiative of NATO, which aims to enhance the interconnectedness and interoperability between the allies. So in response to those criticisms, the Turkish authorities said, okay, we are not going to integrate the S-400s into the NATO defense systems, so they will coexist separately. And Turkey was first suspended from its participation in the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter Consortium, and then removed completely. Turkey was also in process of acquiring 100 F-35s, and on top of it all, Turkey was a founding member of this consortium, and Turkish production defense industries were going to be heavily involved in the manufacturing stages of the F-35s as well. So with that, with the removal of Turkey from this consortium, Turkish defense industry really took a significant blow, with the potential revenue loss of billions of dollars. And what we have seen by the Turkish authorities since then is that Turkish authorities indicated their willingness to acquire 40 fourth generation F-16 Block 70s and 80 modernization kits to update its aging fleet. And Turkish request went into the US Congress 2 months ago, and just last month, the Biden administration indicated its support for that transfer to be made. So certain factors can be identifiable in the intensified intra-alliance opposition behavior by Turkey. One is the systemic variables and the regional subsystemic variables. International system is changing. We are seeing multipolarity now, with the US being challenged by additional actors globally, and also in the subsystemic level, at the regional level, with the EU and its crises. So we have seen Turkey identifying a window of opportunity for reasserting itself, maybe to be recognized as a regional hegemon or a global player. Turkey certainly indicated its willingness to be treated as an equal actor, equal partner to the NATO allies. And the second factors can be determined as regional factors once again. The irreconcilable differences between Turkey and the NATO allies on Syria, Cyprus, Libya, maritime delimitation, hydrocarbon explorations in the region, and the subsequent lack of trust and the distrust that it has created. So we continuously see, for instance, just this week, the tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean rising up, creating further anxieties. And thirdly, domestic factors, economic as well as political factors are influential here, with the rising anti-Americanism, not so much with Euroscepticism, but still rising anti-Americanism. According to latest polls, about 58% of the Turkish public opinion sees US as a security threat, as Professor Özcan also referred to in his comments. So we see the democratic backsliding, creating increased rift between Turkey and its NATO allies, and the composition of the Turkish military has changed significantly in the post-2016 coup attempt and the purges that we have seen subsequently, and the upcoming 2023 elections have certainly created this perfect storm where Turkey wants to further pursue this anti-Kurdish sentiments in the public opinion in order to be able to see some benefits from the
I will ask you to wrap up now.
Yes, by all means. So let me wrap up in a very brief manner. So we see the Russian invasion of Ukraine creating this wonderful opportunity for Turkey to present itself as a reliable NATO ally, and we see the Turkish foreign policy playing a very threading a fine line between Russia and Ukraine, while continuously selling drones to Ukraine and continuously supporting Ukraine with the implementation of the Montreux Convention in terms of the passage to the Black Sea, and also against the background of a looming global food crisis. Turkey once again emerges as a very important ally. I didn't have a chance to talk about the veto of the Finnish and the Swedish applications, but we can do it later.
I mean, I think it would be better to, have a second round where we talk about more contemporary issues. Thank you very much for that overview. Rich, I think the speakers covered quite a lot, but there's still a lot more to say. So over to you.
Well, thank you. What a pleasure to sit and to listen to some really great ideas and great analysis from two real experts in this area. And it's good to refresh some ground that I've lived through as a practitioner of policy, but also to get some fresh ideas. So thank you both to Gencer and to Oya. So my take on this is interesting. I'm an American who's been responsible for policy decisions, or at least working on policy decisions for about 10 years. I was a colonel in the US Army. I was what's called a foreign area officer. So I specialized in the Middle East. And that starts back in 1989, 1990 timeframe. I was there for the Persian Gulf War, was there for the Second Iraq War, Afghanistan, and a lot of the time I spent was working together with Turkey. So many of my views on Turkey's role in NATO and the relationship between the US, NATO, the West, and Turkey are informed by those experiences. So I was in Erzurum, Turkey in 1990 and 1991, at a time when we still had nuclear weapons to deter the Soviet Union from coming to attack NATO. I was in Ankara from 2001 to 2003 as we tried to shape a new NATO and a new sort of bilateral consensus at the same time that the Iraq War was breaking open and things were very much changing both in Turkey and in the world. And then my third sort of window was as an American liaison officer in Afghanistan, working with the Turks as the American representative to a Turkish brigade working in Eastern Kabul. So what, and these were all, NATO was woven through all of this and the Western relationship. And I take Gencer's point that it's US and NATO are sort of interchangeable in this conversation, but I'm going to sort of be a little bit sort of independent in saying that I think that the distinction might be more valuable now than it ever has been in the past 30 years, because things have become so locked up and so calcified in US policy towards Turkey that working primarily through NATO as a vehicle to provide synergy between the two is a better chance now than solving the problems bilaterally. So the first question posed to me was, how has the US and NATO approached Turkey within the alliance since 2000? We got a great historical explication of everything that happened since NATO accession in 1952 for Turkey. And basically the story there is that once the Russians started threatening, which they did, and people sometimes forget that the early Turkish Republic had a very good relationship with the early Soviet Union. That changed after the Soviet Union became sort of dominant on the Eastern Front. They started threatening Turkey over the 3 eastern provinces and over the Straits, and that propelled Turkey into NATO. And that started a great period of synergy. And I think Gencer has covered that very well, but that all changed with the fall of the Soviet Union. When there was no common threat, this loss of a common threat in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union was a life-changing experience for Turkey and NATO and the relationship between the US and NATO and Turkey. The second thing is that NATO started looking for a search for out-of-area missions. So they started finding, if Russia was not the primary threat or the Soviet Union, what does NATO do now? And people who were working this relationship back then remember that this was a big conversation. How does NATO become relevant out of area? The third was an ideological shift. We had this Cold War ideological laydown that worked for the US and it worked for Turkey, where we had the free world, and Turkey was considered part of the free world, and we had the totalitarian world, and that was essentially China and the Soviet Union and everybody who was under their yoke. After 1990 and 91, we shifted a little bit, and then it became a conversation between democratization and authoritarianism. And that worked for us for about 10 years or 12 years as a unifying concept. But as Turkey became, shall we say, a little bit more conservative in the AKP era, this became a real source of friction because Turkey was now on the other side of the ideological barrier, where they had been on the right side of the ideological barrier during the entirety of the Cold War. By the way, I'm a geopolitical thinker, so I'm not a big fan of what the US did there. The US essentially tried to say, we get to define what democracy is, and we get to say who is on the right side of it and on the wrong side of it, and we're still struggling with how that plays out. The fourth thing was globalization and the devaluation of local geopolitical factors. The United States essentially went with the Fukuyama thesis that we're at the end of history. Everything wants to converge on one ideological, one economic, one political model. Local varieties don't matter. So all the local things that mattered to Turkey, such as, well, the relationships with the Arabs, relationships with the Kurds, the unique positioning with regards to Russia, that means that Turkey has to make some hedging bets that other European countries and Western countries don't have to do. This was thrown out the window because the idea was you're either with us or against us because we're all converging on this one view. And the fifth thing was the power shift within Turkey, which is to say that Turkish relations with NATO and the West from 1942 through 2000 and I'll say 7 or 8 were conditioned by Turkish weakness. And by that I mean that Turkey had a democracy, but it was a very dysfunctional multi-party democracy that suffered through multiple coups and street fighting in the late 70s. People tend to forget this in the United States. Near civil war conditions. The 3 coups were not just embrivaki, they were not just arbitrary. It was because the political system was breaking down. So Turkey was politically dysfunctional. It was economically punching under its weight, and geopolitically, it was an important, stable anchor for NATO, but it was not strong enough to have an independent foreign policy. All of this changed as a result of, and this is not the AKP's doing, this is a result of reforms pursued before the AKP and followed through on the AKP, and also technological changes. But as we go from 2000 to 2010 2015, we see a very different Turkey, one that tripled its per capita GDP, one that became much more lethal in terms of military capacity. And one thing that I'll say out of this might generate some questions or be a little controversial, but as someone who worked with the Turkish military in 1991, 2001, 2003, and again 2009, 2010, I will tell you that the Gulen, sort of the battle for institutions within Turkey, between the Gulenist movement, which was trying to establish its control at certain times in conjunction with AKP, and certainly after that against AKP, was a cancer within the Turkish military. The struggle for the control of the Turkish military rendered it much less effective. And there's lots to not like about how the human rights aspects of the trials and what happened after that. I mean, really, it was an ugly situation that unfolded in 2015, 16, and so forth. And I for one, am one of those who believes the Gulen movement was behind the attempted coup in Turkey. But I'm just going to say that as a military practitioner, what that meant was that for 20 years, you had a civil war within the Turkish military. That meant that the Turkish military was rendered ineffective in terms of external operations and really was weaker in terms of its NATO missions. That all changed. And again, we can talk about human rights standards, standards of justice, incarcerations, how long that goes. But there is no doubt that the Turkish military is now subordinated to political control, and it is a more effective regional player than it had been. So what does that mean with regards to NATO? That means that defense industrial cooperation has gone down because Turkey's trying to develop its own stuff, doesn't need to buy from the UK or from the US or from Germany like it used to. And this decreases Western sort of leverage over Turkey in terms of its foreign policy. And yet we see that Turkey has still been willing, even though it diverges from the US and from NATO in many things, on core missions off of its borders, Turkey is in. And by that, I mean, for instance, Afghanistan. And we can go back further into the 90s and look at Bosnia and Somalia and Kosovo. Also, institutionally, Turkey is invested in NATO. Turkey wants to fill its billets. Turkey supports the NATO mission. It also wants to deter Russia, even though it has a pragmatic relationship with Russia in other regards over trade. So it's this very strange situation where Turkey does not, and I'd like to suggest that there's a way to conceptualize this in terms of concentric circles. Everything that regards NATO and the Western orientation of Turkey, the further you get away from Turkey, the more it works. Turkey wants a liberal international order off of its own borders. It does not necessarily want this in its own country, and because there's some complications there, and the struggle between democratization and authoritarianism is still ongoing, and it's a complicated story. Also on its borders, because of the PKK threat, which is a very real terrorist threat, and a very real, in my view, and a very real threat to the territorial integrity of the country and to the citizens of the country. This means that liberal international rules don't apply on the borders and in the near zones in Iraq and Syria that are part of the sort of conflictual post-Cold War order. Yet, as we go to Africa, as we go to Central Asia, as we go to Afghanistan, these are places where Turkey essentially wants the same thing as the rest of the West and the United States and Europe. It wants a liberal international order, at least some version of that. So let me wrap this up, because I know I could talk about this stuff forever, by saying that it's complicated. Turkey's an imperfect partner for the West. That's always been the case. It's a different civilizational model, and it has very specific concerns in terms of its security, including the PKK, that the rest of Europe has a problem appreciating and doesn't really take in the same sense that the Turks do. And yet what we find in the case of Ukraine, but also Afghanistan and also Libya and also the Caucasus, is that Turkey is better a partner with whom we have to work through difficult problems than an adversary or someone we kick out. And I find it so irresponsible and so sort of implausible when people in the West, especially in Washington, D.C., say they are not a partner, we should kick them out of NATO. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. This is a country with increasing weight economically, geopolitically, and militarily. They can be part of the solution from a Western perspective. It means making some compromises, and I think those compromises need to be done. What can be done differently? In the case of the United States, we need to stop sort of indexing all of our foreign policy decisions with Turkey to our domestic political debate. And believe me, Republicans and Democrats both can find reasons to bash Turkey, and they both have. and yet I think that there's still pragmatic deals that can be done together with Turkey, including in the Ukraine, the grain corridor. I think the talks today didn't go all that well, but that's still something we're pursuing, that Turkey's pursuing, that we're both interested in. Again, Libya, Central Asia, Africa, places where we don't want the Russians to dominate. We don't want the Chinese to dominate, but we don't care enough to actually go solve those problems ourselves or to invest a large amount of energy. We need to find some hard deals with Turkey, and we're not gonna look at Turkey at any point and say this is exactly the model of domestic governance we want, and we're not that we're exactly comfortable with what's going on in your borders, because Greece and some of the Kurdish issues and the Armenian issues, because of our own domestic politics, we will have some friction on those. But I would submit, and this will be my final comment until we get to questions, that the United States has lost a skill that we had during the Cold War. Because believe me, if you look back at the history of Cyprus, 1974, 1975, that whole period, we had big disagreements, but we had a skill for working through them that involved a little bit of compromise on things that we were quite certain our Turkish partners were wrong on, but we realized their weight meant we had to compromise on. We've lost that skill. And as a result, the stress level within the relationship is very high. I think both for NATO and the UK especially have been a little more adult on this than Washington. And for Washington itself, we need to find a new synthesis to make that work like it did in the Cold War.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of the speakers. A lot of food for thought, and it has been a very comprehensive overview of relations as well. I already see questions in the Q&A, so please continue to ask your questions, and you can also vote the questions up and down, and that would also make it easier for me to sort the questions as well. But first, I would like to use my privilege as the chair and ask the speakers, because Oya was already getting into it and reached towards the end as well. So I would like to ask you to comment a bit on the recent developments. So as we said at the beginning of the seminar, Turkey-NATO relations took an interesting and perhaps an unexpected turn with Russia's war in Ukraine. So I would like to ask each of you to briefly address how you think Turkey's partnership with NATO has evolved with the war in Ukraine. So we can start with Gencer and follow the same order.
Okay. Okay, of course, the war was to a certain extent unexpected, and also rather than the beginning of the war, the way that the war unfolded was unexpected, because many experts was expecting a quick and crushing victory on the part of Russia, and the collapse of the Ukrainian army or defense would not stand against the Russian invasion. But these things did not happen, and then we all of a sudden we have a different situation, and then it turned out to be a war of attrition. So in that regard, the Turkey was having relations with both sides and thought that they can sustain the policies that having good relations or having relations with both sides continue. But I think that this is going to be a sort of problematic for Turkey because this issue, I mean, another unexpected issue, that the Finnish and the Swedish application for the NATO membership became a major problem for Turkey because Turkey vetoed. So this is another unexpected decision. And this is going to I do not think that this is going to bring about positive results for Turkey because the Turkey's policy, the balancing policy on the issue is not sustainable, and probably Turkey is going to make a sort of U-turn, compromise on its position, and I don't know what's going to. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know what's going to happen. One thing is obvious that I would like to highlight here is that the decision should not be. I mean, the negotiations should be conducted at lower levels, and of course, the President Erdogan could make could have made different statement, but made a very strict statement, and somehow locked all the the bureaucrats, diplomats on working at the lower level. So I mean the room to maneuver, room to compromise is very narrow now for Turkey, for the diplomats, for those who are involved in the negotiations, and the demands made by Turkey is to a certain extent unacceptable for at least for Sweden. And then we also witnessed that Turkey began to change its demands. I mean, dropping some of the demands, and also we have seen that the demands, the list of demands, are not well calculated, are not well studied. And for instance, like asking an Iranian origin, and asking, the extradition of people who are dead, extradition of people who are not the citizens of Turkey, etc., etc. These are something that telling us that we are not before a well-calculated, well-prepared policy about Sweden. And in that regard, as I said, Turkey, of course, has every right to raise some questions before using its capacity, its powers, to say yes or no to a membership application. It's, of course, I mean, for instance, let's take the case of Greece, and Greece said no to Macedonia for years, only for the naming of the country. And Turkey is also having the same rights. But I mean, the way that we conduct, the way that we proceed, with the way that we, put forward our ideas, our policies, is not very, I would say, constructive and productive. So this is something else, and this is something very important. And the one thing I would like to add, that this is a kind of framework in which I can formulate my views about the AK Party's foreign policy. That the Erdogan's foreign policy, AK Party's foreign policy, is a seems to be a foreign policy of survival, right? Because in regional politics, in the north, in the south, in the Middle East, Turkey's Turkey's room to maneuver in is becoming narrower and narrower. So I mean, now we are trying to normalize our relations with Egypt, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates. But the normalization, of course, in one way or another, we are going to, quote unquote, normalize our relations. But this normalization wouldn't mean that we are going to back to the normal, say, at the 10 years ago, that the normal that we were in 10 years ago. So the normal will be a new normal. And I do not think, and I'm afraid the new normal is not something that to the like of the AK Party administration. So for the time being, this is what I'm going to say about it.
Great, thank you very much. Oya, 5 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Sorry about the overextended remarks. I get overly excited, as can be told from the screen. In any case, I just want to talk about the recent developments with regards to Ukraine, and what was once regarded as a liability for the Western alliance, the rapprochement between Turkey and the West. Turkey and Russia. We can see in this particular case, the Turkish authorities really want to thread this fine line between Russia and Ukraine on the other hand, and Turks have been very supportive of the possibility of a Ukrainian accession into NATO, have been very critical for years in terms of Russian treatment of the Crimean Tatars and the continued drone sales to the Ukrainian government, which really helped give some tactical advantage over Russian advances. We have seen some really positives on that front, and also Turkey's willingness to implement the Montreux Convention as well. Having said that, throughout this continued, rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, especially in terms of defense and security issues, I make a case that, you may reach a certain point in time where reverting back will not be possible anymore. So it is a very path path-dependent procedure, once you really corner yourself so much that you really block all possible means of getting arms equipment, defense industry equipment from the Western allies, that you will have very limited options that you can pursue for acquiring these materials from non-Western partners, right? So this is going to put Turkey into a very difficult position, is what I argued, especially with regards to the S-400 issues, because it really creates this path dependency for Turkey. At the same time, we can see that this invasion really created a very centralized importance for Turkey in the transatlantic relations, like I was saying about the Black Sea, global food crisis, grain export blockage, the importance of really putting an end to Russian aggression, because it is also in the immediate neighborhood of Turkey as well. So there are certain common interests, as Rich has pointed out, that can be identified, that can really get the Turks and the NATO allies together to cooperate on these important issues. And I argue that the war in Ukraine represents a wake-up call for Turkey that made Turkey recognize the importance of the transatlantic alliance, because Turkey and Russia do not see eye to eye on any issues, actually, but they still continue to cooperate, right? Or from Libya to Syria to Ukraine, they do not see eye to eye with each other at all. So it is important to remember and remind ourselves that deeply rooted alliance ties cannot be replaced by the transactional, day-to-day, manipulation of relations that we have been seeing between Turkey and Russia. Hence, NATO alliance is of crucial importance for Turkish foreign policy, I argue. And at the same time, I would like to make a point on the Swedish and the Finnish application for NATO and the threat from Turkey to veto those applications. NATO is based on unanimity decision-making process when it comes to accession of new member states. And we have seen this is completely in contradiction with the Turkey's overall open door policy when it comes to NATO accession. So Turkey has been a very fervent, very adamant supporter of NATO expansion. And this, we see a reversal of that. And in fact, according to the Turkish President's Office statement that was released recently, Sweden and Finland should make it clear that they have stopped supporting terrorism, have lifted defense air export restrictions on Turkey, and are ready to show alliance solidarity. So you can see certain trends here reverting back to the framework of intra-alliance opposition that I talked about. Entangling diplomacy is what the Turks are using here. Through the use of rules and procedures of international institutions, they try to influence their counterparts' foreign policies. In this case, both Sweden, mostly Sweden, to a certain extent Finland, and to a certain extent the US policies as well. But it is still within the realm of boundary testing, I would argue, because all signaling indicates that they are interested in continuing, like ultimately giving the green light. This is what Jens Stoltenberg has been saying, the NATO Secretary General, for instance. Second issue that I would like to bring up is the issue linkage bargaining statecraft tool, which is in an intersection of boundary testing and boundary breaking, actually. So issue linkage bargaining, by simultaneously discussing two or more issues for joint settlement, the country aims to increase the possibility of reaching a negotiated agreement. So you can see that they are saying, get rid of the arms embargo and we will give you the green light. Sell us those F-16s and the 80 modernization kits, and we will give the green light. So you see issue bargaining, issue linkage bargaining at play here. If the stakes on the future of the alliance are higher, then we classify it as the boundary breaking realm. But I believe that it is simply in the boundary testing stage at this point in time with regards to Swedish and Finnish threats to veto also for their accession into NATO.
So, I mean, when we face issues like this, it's always good to have like a theoretical, background to fall back on to interpret events, or otherwise, you would, in a sense, kind of exaggerate even the meaning of a statement, of a meaning of an event, even though it is significant. At the same time, when you have that theoretical background, it gives you more room to interpret things from a historical perspective. Great, Rich?
I'll be brief on this point, because I think the impact of Ukraine is pretty simple to conceptualize in terms of how Turkey relates to the West. You can look at Turkish relations with the West in the 20th and 21st centuries as a sine wave. And the sine wave is driven by a sense of threat. When that threat comes from the East, Turkey tacks towards the West. And so it's actually two sort of out of sync sine waves. And when things are better with the West, they're worse with the East, and vice versa. So the Soviets made a big mistake in 1940, 41, 42, when Molotov came and threatened Turkey and said, we need a base on the Straits, and we need you to break your defense relationship with Great Britain, and we need the three eastern vilayets back. That drove Turkey directly to the West. Now, the problem for the US since the end of the Cold War is that we became the disruptive and threatening factor on Turkey's borders. As NATO looked for external missions, and as the United States embarked upon a program of democratization, especially for the Middle East, right, which some refer to as the Greater Middle East Project, but certainly trying to intervene in Libya, in Syria, and Iraq in ways that would bring a different form of government, but naively, without the willingness to stay and to actually build institutions to do that. This badly destabilized Turkey's borders. So we had a Turkey as of 2010, 11, 12 that had to look around its periphery and say, look, we've got Americans now that encouraged an uprising in Syria that they didn't support, and now we have chaos in Syria that they invaded to establish something stronger. PKK is not solving the problems in the South Caucasus by allowing the 30-year occupation of the 20% of Azerbaijan's territory to continue. So we, the United States and the West, in a sense, became the proximate threat on Turkey's borders. Mm-hmm. And this led to a huge campaign of balancing and hedging. Mm-hmm. Not new. You go back, the
Rich,
first...
Rich, you are cutting off. So we are getting like intermittent connection with you, I think.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll restate the basic point.
Okay.
The US in the last 15, 20 years became a proximate threat to the security of Turkey's borders. Mm-hmm. And that caused Turkey to rebalance and rehedge towards the Russians. It's not a new pattern. If you go back to the 20s, the 30s, in the 20th century, this was actually what's going on. Ukraine is a pivotal change in that, because Russia, through its new revanchism, by trying to essentially extinguish Ukrainian independence, has become a critical threat, not just to Ukraine, but to the independence of small countries throughout the Black Sea Basin, including Georgia, including Azerbaijan, and threatening Turkey's interests in the Black Sea region as well. So this is a critical geopolitical point that is driving Turkey, even though it needs to maintain positive relations with Russia, driving it into further synchronization with the West. And to me, that's the real importance of what's happened for Ukraine. Ukraine must survive for Turkey to able to balance against Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have actually a lot of questions. So I will ask you, what I will do is I will ask 3 questions and you can choose whichever question you want to answer, and we will have to go through these as quickly as possible because we have only 30 minutes left. So there are a couple of questions about kicking Turkey out of NATO due to human rights concerns. And listening to Gencer and also Rich, one question that came to my mind is about NATO being a democratic group of states. Was NATO ever, because Gencer was saying that NATO was never interested in democratic backsliding or military interventions in Turkey. And at the moment as well, I mean, the credentials of some members in terms of democracy can be put into dispute. So taking all of that into consideration, should we classify Turkey as of NATO as a community of democratic states, and on that basis, should treatment of Turkey within NATO be different? So that would be the first question. The second question is asking it from a reverse, like why Turkey is not leaving NATO. So one is like, should NATO kick Turkey out? And then the other is, should Turkey leave NATO? So the question is from Hani Altalep. Being part of the NATO, its members expect Turkey to act in a certain way, which mainly looks like following orders, while being turned down when Turkey's security is at stake. Why does Turkey still think that being part of the NATO is beneficial when joining other alliances with non-NATO actors could be more strategic? And there are also other questions in the list that ask, for instance, about the Collective Security Treaty Organization. So would those alternative organizations be better? And then the third question is about public opinion in Turkey vis-a-vis NATO and the US. So it was asked by Yalın Karagül. So he's asking if there is a chance that the reason for opposition to NATO and America in the public is due to the consequences of Gladio, Ergenekon, and fears that NATO used certain groups like Bozkurt to fund terror in Turkey historically. I guess these types of theories are abundant among the Turkish public. How much truth is in there in terms of like supporting various terrorist groups within Turkey? And if these are just conspiracy theories, why, I would ask, there's such a belief in them in the public? So like I said, I mean, you can choose whichever question you want to answer, but I will ask you to be as brief as possible. Let's go in the reverse order now. Let's start with Rich, Oya, and Gencer. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, look, I think that NATO is not always a community of values. It is always a community of strategic interest. And when they, so Portugal was a military democracy, military dictatorship at a certain point, as was Greece. They were both allowed back in. I think Greece was out for a little while. France pulled out of the military command structure for a while. Turkey's had its problems. All of the countries, or most of them in NATO, have had coups. They've had foreign adventures. They've had some democratic shortcomings. And at any given time, and especially in light, to be self-critical as an American, of the war in Iraq, that we did not have broad international support to lead, to claim that the United States has a values litmus test, and that when we fall short of those values, our allies should not stick with us, violates the understanding of what an alliance is. An alliance means we will not go to war with you. We will not attack you, and we will take your security seriously. NATO, leaving aside the issue of Turkey, has a double standard here when it comes to the PKK, because the PKK is a threat to Turkey's security. And as long as the rest of NATO does not take that seriously, including Sweden and Finland, and the US has designated PKK as a foreign terror organization, but funds its Syrian franchise, the YPG, then how can we look at Turkey and say, because of your democratic shortcomings, you don't deserve to stay in the alliance? I think that the security dimension has to weigh heavier than the democratic identity dimension of the alliance. Now, it would be great for us all to be perfect democratic societies, and we should push one another towards that, and there's other tools to do that. But I guess the answer to my question, the answer to the question from my perspective is no. Turkey should not be kicked out of NATO because of democratic shortcomings. We should all work with Turkey to, and I don't deny that there are Turkish, as a friend of Turkey, there are democratic shortcomings. And by the way, we have those in many countries of the West. But kicking a country out is not the way to deal with them. I'll be vulgar here for a second. In the US military, we have an old saying, it's better to have someone inside the tent peeing out than outside the tent peeing in. What I mean by that is to say that if someone is going to do something you don't like, it's better to still have them within the community, and so that you can deal with it by shared standards and at least shared aspirations. And the other thing is, Turkey should not leave NATO either, because at a minimum, first of all, organizations offer very little value, and they're not nothing like NATO, which is the most successful military alliance in the history of the world. But at a minimum, whatever happens in Iraq, Syria, or anywhere else, as a NATO ally, Turkey will not be attacked by the United States and the other members of NATO. That's important, because some of the things that have happened, and some of the discussion here has reflected on that, the antipathy in Ankara and Istanbul and other Turkish cities towards the West is high. The antipathy in the West towards Turkey is high. To have something to arrest that antipathy, which is a formal alliance, means that we will not go to war. That alone is worth both sides staying in.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I would like to echo Rich's wonderful points on that and remind our audiences that kicking out of NATO mechanisms don't exist as per the Washington Treaty of 1949. A member can voluntarily withdraw from the organization, from the alliance, but they cannot be kicked out. So this really eliminates the possibility of the first question that you addressed to us, Yaprak. And secondly, Turkey, as I also cover in the book, has made multiple threats of joining Shanghai Cooperation Organization instead of EU membership, or sometimes it was posed as an alternative to NATO as well. But the Turkish authorities that I spoke to has always emphasized the benefits of the NATO membership for Turkey when it comes to its immediate neighborhood, when it comes to its relations with the Balkans, for instance, when it comes to its relations with the African countries, North African countries. So it is certainly a leverage for Turkish foreign policy that Turkey is a member of this strongest alliance in the contemporary international affairs, the most successful one indeed. And it also gives certain security guarantees through the Musketeer Clause, Article 5, that, you know, one for all for one. And Turkey has benefited from that in multiple episodes in its history. So I think that it is too important and too valuable as an asset for Turkey to simply ignore or let go of. So, and the Turkish authorities are quite cognizant of that fact as well.
Thank you. Gencer?
I agree with Oya's points, and of course there is no mechanisms to kick out members out of NATO. This is one thing, and Greece and France withdrew from the military wing of the organization. But one thing is obvious. I mean, I agree with Rich and Oya that Turkish authorities, I mean, including the AK Party administration, they have no intention to leave NATO, because the benefits are very, I mean, in comparison to the advantages weigh much higher, much heavier than the disadvantages. This is one thing. And second thing, perhaps we would like to remember a couple of incidents, I mean, that we have had in the recent past. I mean, one, that incidents that Turkish authorities asked NATO to come to the assistance of Turkey, and one of them was Mavi Marmara incident in May 2010, right, when the Israeli commandos raided the Freedom Flotilla. At the time, Foreign Minister Davutoğlu applied to NATO and called NATO Council to meet. And another example, interesting example, which is, I think, a very telling example to keep in mind, that when Turkey downed Su-24 jet fighter, Russian fighter, in November 2015, it's exactly, again, this time he was a prime minister. Once again, he called NATO to come to help of Turkey. So I mean, so these are the the recent examples that Turkey is, I mean, is aware of the the contribution that NATO can provide for Turkey. Although in both cases, NATO said no to Turkish demands, but this is reflecting or indicating the Turkey's say importance that the Turkish authorities attach to NATO. This is one thing, and of course there are many parties, calling for the withdrawal from NATO, etc., etc. But I think we should consider those people as or what they do as the radicalism of the important, as I call, right? So I mean, they have no say possibility to come to power. So they say, I mean, the most radical, they demand most radical demands, etc. And one question about the Gladio issue, it's very significant. I mean, this is one of the points that I originally planned to include my introductory speech. Of course, this, the Gladio stay behind issues are very important, and then these are the dark corners of the relationship between Turkey and NATO. And in many member countries, in European countries, these issues are revealed, and the documents are declassified, and the public was enlightened, etc., etc. But the Turkey is now having no, say, kind of information, public information provided by the authorities. And last point that I would like to say about the PKK relationship, it's, of course, I totally agree with Rich. I mean, that the Americans are trying to convince about this differentiate PKK from PYD is a funny thing. It's not convincing at all. However, I mean, again, the Americans are in a kind of transactional relationship with PKK, right? I mean, I always tell my students, right, the heaviest blow that the PKK received in its history. I asked the question, what's the heaviest blow that the organization received in its history? I mean, it's obvious, the apprehension of Abdullah Öcalan in 1999. And then it was a CIA operation. We all know that he was packed by the CIA and delivered to Turkey. So, I mean, how do we see, I mean, the change in the American attitudes? On the one hand, you see, I mean, in order to gain the confidence of Turkey before the operation in Iraq, right? And then the Americans delivered Abdullah Öcalan to Turkey. But on the other hand, now they have been doing business with PKK. So this is a kind of transactional affair. And again, I agree with Rich that the Americans would find a way. I mean, both sides, both Americans and Turks, would find a way to reach a sort of agreement to sort out this problem. Last point, and that we are now heading towards a very run up to very critical elections, and probably according to polls, Erdogan's AK Party administration is going to terminate. So in that regard, I think we have to keep in mind when we say Turkey, which Turkey we are talking about in a year's time. Turkey will be different. Turkey might be different than the Turkey the Turkey we have now. I mean, this is something that I would say.
Great, thank you very much. So we have 15 minutes left, and we have several questions on the Eastern Mediterranean. So I will pose them together, and then perhaps add a different question into the mix. So Eleni Palazidou Özgür Kuşçu and Anthony Velion. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your names. They're kind of all asking questions about Turkey's foreign policy with regards to Greece and Cyprus. It is very difficult to summarize very quickly, but then I guess from one perspective, Turkey looks quite threatening and menacing towards Greece, and quite adamant in its approach to Cyprus. So what would you say about that? Maybe you can quickly summarize, Turkey's stance in that sense. But there's also the question of the US now shifting some of its bases to Greece. So within the NATO alliance, there is this like historical kind of belief that the US would always favor Turkey when it came to Greek-Turkish affairs. So at the moment, it feels like that's changing a bit. And so they're allying, or they are kind of cooperating with Greece more because let's say they cannot really trust Turkey, or because of the relations. So is it possible for that dynamic to change in the near future, or can we assume that the US would continue to ally more strongly with Greece? And I guess there's also the question of Cyprus's membership in the EU, and whether that has an impact on Turkish NATO relations. Although, of course, it is not directly related, but then it is an important issue in terms of NATO-EU cooperation, for instance. Does that change, let's say, European perceptions towards Turkey? So those will be the Eastern Mediterranean questions. Because we're running out of time, and I really wanted to ask this question. Hani Altaleb is asking, Turkey is a Muslim majority country with growing power, and it will always be viewed this way by NATO members. So does this partially explain the continued debate on considering it as an unreliable partner? So this is a good question in the sense that, we have established that NATO is not a value-based, normative community, but Turkey happens to be the only Muslim country in NATO. So do you think that that plays a role? And with the AKP, there was another question in the list. With the AKP in power, perhaps has that influenced Turkey's NATO relations more because of the AKP's more conservative outlook. So, ladies first. Oh yeah, for the last round. Yeah.
Thank you. I have to acknowledge something here. I'm working on my third book right now. I was at Harvard University as a visiting scholar there last semester, working on this book on Eastern Mediterranean balance of power. So I think I will be in good shape to answer the questions on that. I identify the Eastern Mediterranean as a powder keg, a title that belonged to the Balkans back in the 1990s, but I think that it rightfully belongs to the Eastern Mediterranean in the 2020s, because we have seen really this emerging return of geopolitical and strategic competition in the region, and Turkish authorities felt more and more cornered and isolated in the region, whereas the Republic of Cyprus, Greece has engaged in multiple alliances with Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Israel, and so on and so forth. And we have seen the creation of EastMed Gas Forum back in 2019, and we have seen recently the US authorities actually declaring the pipeline project to be quite unfeasible due to the costs and the projection in terms of its timeline, construction of a timeline. And we have seen the tensions have been on the rise ever since hydrocarbon resources were discovered off the coast of Cyprus in 2011. and Turkey's immediate goal was to make sure that the Turkish Cypriots' interests would be protected as well as the Greek Cypriot interests. So Turkey serving as a guarantor state based on that 1960 constitution. So we have seen Turks act in that capacity and increasingly engage in gunboat diplomacy with the, escorting of the hydrocarbon drilling ships with the Turkish Navy. And there have been certain skirmishes between Turkish Navy and Greek and French navies on the other side back in the summer of 2020. And that is a very, very volatile situation, right? Because you have 3 NATO allies that were involved in these skirmishes. And obviously at the time, the US interest was focused elsewhere as well. So because of this, reluctance to be involved in Middle Eastern, Mediterranean affairs. So that really ensured that the United States didn't really play a mediating role there. So thankfully, Merkel's government was involved in order to broker a sort of an agreement between Turkey and Greece primarily, and NATO's deconfliction mechanisms kicked in as well. And Stoltenberg basically played a very important role, bringing the 2 parties together to resume the exploratory talks. However, just last week, we have seen the exploratory talks unfortunately getting coming to a conclusion, ending by the Turkish authorities. So you can see that that nervousness is there, but the fact that Turkey is a member of NATO really provides that security guarantee and perhaps a peace of mind for the countries in the region that they are not going to get involved in a particular hot conflict between the 2 NATO allies. And the important thing is the Cyprus's membership in EU certainly complicates the relationship between EU and NATO, as I discuss in my book as well. They played outside veto players against the other counterpart institutions. So Turkey, being in NATO and outside of the EU, poses a veto for the official coordination of security information exchange between NATO on the one hand and the European Union on the other hand. And the same is true for Cyprus, being a member of EU and not even a member of the Partnership for Peace mechanism of NATO. You see the tensions there, which really is reflected really negatively at the institutional level when it comes to taking important strategic decisions for coordination, interinstitutional coordination between the 2 institutions. So it certainly adds to the complexity, but thankfully there is some creative thinking on the part of both the NATO and the EU policymakers that on the field, whenever the 2 institutions coexist in a particular operation side by side, there is field coordination between the representative staff in the field. So that somehow gets around the interinstitutional veto and lack of coordination at the official level.
Okay, perfect. Gencer, 2 minutes. You muted yourself.
Okay. Well, in 2 minutes, instead of saying many things, I would like to say one point that you raised and also Rich talked about. So with all due respect, I would differ from what Rich said about NATO, and I checked a book on the enlargement of NATO after the Cold War in mid-1990s. NATO produced a checklist for the new members, and in that checklist there were 5 basic criteria: an established democracy, respect for human rights, a market-based economy, armed forces under civilian control, and good relations with neighboring states. So my question is simple. Had Turkey been a candidate country in mid-1990s for the membership of NATO, would it be eligible? So, I mean, my answer to my question would be no. But on the other hand, I agree with Rich that the NATO is not, it's a living institution, right? So it's exposed to global currents, international relations, crises, etc., etc. So then, time to time, its evolution takes some, other directions, or becomes a kind of different organization, which is sometimes becoming more value-based or sensitive to values. And let's hope together that in the coming years, NATO will be more interested in such democratic values. This is what I would like to say. And about the Eastern Mediterranean, again, I would differ from my colleague Oya that in the Eastern Mediterranean, if you use the metaphor of powder keg, right? I'm afraid there is not enough powder in the keg. So there is no natural gas around, say, Cyprus. Well, this makes a lot of difference, and therefore, we better not to, how should I say, exaggerate the tension that Turkey is a part. Turkey is, creating, and most of the time, the Turkey's actions should be considered as part of the power strategies that Erdogan is following to hold on to power. So, so far, he is masterfully instrumentalized any issue to portray himself as an international leader, as a leader of international magnitude, etc., etc. So, just then, as an answer or as a response, comment on what Oya said.
Okay, excellent. So I will give the floor to Rich for around 2 minutes. If you want, you can reply to Gencer or answer the questions.
Sure. Well, just on the issue of Turkey and NATO and values. Look, I was a lieutenant, 22 years old, working with Turks. I was in my 20s and 30s working with Palestinians, with Afghans, with Iraqis, many different. When you're trying to build camaraderie and when you're trying to build shared values between people from different institutions, and NATO is a military institution at the end of the day, you don't get anywhere by saying, hey, you know what, you don't belong. You don't smell like us, you don't look like us, you're not democratic enough. So the community of values is always aspirational. NATO, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a community of values within NATO. What I'm saying is, look at now, if you're of a liberal mind, Poland and Hungary and Turkey don't smell right. They smell far too conservative, and frankly, maybe the
UK probably.
maybe the United States. Yeah, and so on the other hand, if you're from a conservative bent, which Turkey is, you get to looking at countries like Sweden and Finland, and you're like, whoa, you guys are way out on accepting radicalism. There has to be a mechanism for reconciling that, but you can't lead with that. Requirements and priorities, because that's what a military alliance is. Now, on the Eastern Med stuff, I'm going to quote somebody here who knows history better than me by saying that since 1821, which I guess is the foundation of the independent Greece, between Greece and Turkey, one of those two countries has tried to invade the other, and it's not Turkey that has tried to invade Greece. The whole Megali Ide and all that. I think that Greece, as I said earlier, has reasons as a smaller country to be concerned, but Turkey clearly has no realistic expansionist program with regards to Greece. They don't want to take the islands back. They don't want to take the Thrace back. What they want is a revision of the division of whatever hydrocarbon assets are there, and some sort of demarcation that's not entirely prejudicial to Turkish interests in the Eastern Med and the Aegean. I don't blame Greece for doing what they're doing. I don't blame the Turkey for doing what they're doing. They're both playing hardball in a difficult area. I think this is an utter and abject failure of U.S. leadership. We need win-win for Greece and Turkey in both of these places, and it begins with maritime demarcation. But the U.S. has sort of abdicated on this point for right now for a couple of reasons, and I suspect that it will continue to avoid a leadership role until there's a government in Ankara that it finds less objectionable, because the truth is neither Democrats nor Republicans really like the AKP, and they don't want to be perceived as giving them any favors.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. It has been a great pleasure to have the opportunity for me, and I think for everyone in the audience, to listen to our speakers today. We have indeed covered a lot of ground. There were also other questions. We couldn't actually find the time to go over them. Apologies if your question was not asked. But come to another event organized by the Contemporary Turkish Studies and the European Institute. Follow us on Twitter and go to our website and visit our events page. Thank you to our speakers for such an excellent discussion again, and to all of you in the audience for listening and for contributing by asking your questions. Good night.
You.